a lot of times people are unable to deal with really heavy issues because they're so traumatic to them and they're overwhelming just to the point that they can't confront them at all. So is Idenics able to help with really heavy issues, or are you just like trying to skitter around and handle the nice little things that might be problems to people?
Well, no, we handle whatever the person brings up. And when I first start working with a person, they almost the first session they bring up the heaviest stuff.
Oh,
I don't
really?
have a lot of people. I don't have a lot of people that are coming to me going, well, I'll just take up the light stuff first and then work my way into it, because I'm telling them it's whatever you want to address directly. So a lot of them are the things that are most on on their mind, and the things that are the heaviest. It's just always kind of worked that way on a general basis. In fact, when we used to work with people exclusively from out of town, a lot of the people would come in, that's the first things they'd be addressing was the heavy stuff. And then maybe they come back and it's just becomes easier and easier for them because they're getting that stuff out of the way first. A lot of people just do that because it's what's on their mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's what I'm asking them for. What is it you want to work on? What's most important thing to take up first? Those are the questions. And that's what they're telling me. So, and for these people, these things are heavy. It might not be heavy for somebody else, but they're heavy for that person.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And some of them would be considered heavy. Somebody that was molested as a child by an uncle or something like that. Sure. People go, oh yeah, that's heavy. Well, it is, but those kind of things are, are the kind of thing we take up. Okay. And when you say it's overwhelming because the person hasn't really been able to look much at it. It's something they've thought about. They've been given advice about that sort of thing. You were
I mean, there are
mentioning,
people that have been there are people that have been in therapy for years talking about the same thing over and over
same
and
thing.
over. So how
Right.
can you say that they haven't looked at it?
Well, they have probably thought about it. Maybe they've done some looking at it, but if they've really looked at it and inspected it, it wouldn't be an issue.
Okay.
Okay, they wouldn't be coming to me if it was maybe how much they got done wasn't enough. Otherwise, they wouldn't be bringing it up again.
Huh.
And I'm going to take these issues up till they don't bring them up, till it's handled for them.
Hmm.
Right now, when you talk about overwhelming, it's because the person is just sitting in this whole confused mess, and that's overwhelming for anybody.
Hmm.
So it's a matter of the questions that I'm going to be asking them, because these are good questions. These are questions that will take them to the heart of some of these things, and but you're doing it one thing at a time. You're taking it apart. You're not taking the whole thing on at once, and that's what's the overwhelming part. As you kind of clean it up bit by bit, because there's different parts to these things. I mean, there may be things that the person that are hidden for the person, put out of sight for the person, suppressed, squashed. There can be feelings, there can be emotions connected with this,
And
sensations,
and you're able to
efforts.
deal with
Each of
these
these,
one at a time?
one at a time. We have
Huh.
different ways of asking the questions and working with them. So
Huh.
as you pick these things apart, the parts of it start coming apart. You know,
Hmm.
decisions they make, conclusions, others have made, all this kind of stuff. And a lot of this stuff is all in a great big ball, all kind of just stuck together.
Hmm.
So you're just kind of pulling a string and just kind of pulling it apart by having to look and you get, and how do you, and once you get to a certain point, the whole thing just unravels.
Hmm.
You know, it'll just unravel and won't be an issue for the person, because if you really think about it, something like that, as horrible as some incident was for a person, okay, it is not going on now. It's over. There's
Sure.
nothing they can do in any kind of therapy or self-improvement that's going to make that not to have happened.
True.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. This person was molested by a relative when they were 4 years old. That did happen, and they remember it. And this was okay, but it's done. It's over. Okay, so that person's not doing it to them now. That person may be dead for 40 years,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But in their own mind, that person's still there.
Mm.
They still have certain things going on. But that's all the stuff they carried forward to right now
Mm-hmm.
that they're sitting in front of me. So those are their responses. Those they can look at and let go of.
Mm-hmm.
What happened is how it happened. What they're clinging to, and that's the only thing. That's the only problems they have. There are no after effects to anything that happens to us like that, except for maybe permanent physical damage. But other than that, this kind of stuff, there's no after effects other than what one makes at the time and keeps. What one makes and keeps. That's the after effects. In other words, what one is clinging to,
Mm.
even if unknowingly.
What
Okay.
one's stuck in.
That's the stuckness. Stuck is something. Stuck is you're not really noticing what's going on. It's just there.
Right.
It's something on automatic that just every time certain things come up, the person acts a certain way or has certain thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All
So
right.
you hear about that a lot with folks that folks that have various types of PTSD, whether it's whether they were mugged or
Yeah.
abused or in the war,
Right.
and something will happen. Like you hear a lot about guys who were in the war who now, uh, they can't sit with their back to a door, for
Right.
instance, right? They
Right.
they they're always on edge, and the tension and the anxiety, is that the sort of thing that you can help with?
Yes. Yes. These are things that happened probably began at the time, and the person's carried them forward with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not at the time. Maybe those were valid emotions for that time period. In other words, person's father dies, or and they're in grief. Well, that's what are they supposed to be? Happy? No, they're going to be in grief. They're going to be upset.
Right.
But it's that. So 10 years later, they still weep every time they see someone. That's different. That's there's something that's stuck.
Mm-hmm.
You but only because how do I know? I'm not observing that in them. That's what they're telling me.
Mm-hmm.
I still can't. Or something. These are things that I mean clinging to.
Right.
In other words, those are the examples, and I can think of lots of them. Anytime a person comes to me, it's something like that in the
It's all the
background.
heavy stuff.
It, but the heavy stuff isn't always what everybody would consider heavy. Like the idea that it's got to be a traumatic, an event that really is traumatic in a way that I would understand, like painful and unconsciousness or rape, or sometimes it's very subtle.
Huh.
You would look at it and you would go, how could that be traumatic to the person? Well, it was to that person
Right.
at the time.
Right.
Okay. It was, in other words, these conditions get started. When they get started, right before they begin, there was always what we in Idenics call a confusion, a disruption of one's intention or expectation is our definition of it. Not a definition I'm going to give to a client, but that's just more of the practitioner
Huh.
understanding of what it is.
Sure.
It's and so what a confusion is for one person is not necessarily a confusion for another. I mean, I remember one where a guy had something where his tension kept going for years every time he'd bring up this condition. In other therapy, in other modalities, and in
Mm.
therapy, he brought it up from the first time he ever went for assistance, 25 years before he ever came here.
Hmm.
And he kept coming up with the same thing at the beginning of the incident, which had to do with a little girl looking at him on a playground. She didn't say anything. There was no abuse. There was no loss. There was no pain. There was nothing. It was a look.
Huh.
And it's, of course, it was glossed over by the people that worked with this guy.
Uh-huh.
Well, there's something got to be below that, and oh yeah, there must be. And
Huh.
plus they were convinced, that they had to look in other areas and do other things. And, and so all these years later, when this person came to us, and the practitioner, I remember was John at the time,
Uh-huh.
Ask them about where this started. Oh no, not that stupid incident again.
Huh.
I've looked at this 500 times. Ugh. Well, how about we look at it one more time? You willing to? All right. Well, that's where it started.
Huh.
And that was a confusion for that person at that time.
Mm.
Okay. Doesn't matter well, that can't be. What do you mean it can't be?
So then how long did it take John to
An hour.
an hour?
Yeah, in that session to clean up a condition this guy had been trying to resolve for 25 years.
Oh my goodness.
No, but he was right there. He answered the question for other people. This is where it started. Yeah, this is the
Huh.
thing he came up with. If anybody had believed him, really, and
Uh-huh.
listened to him, they could have cleaned it up then. But every time he took up this condition throughout the years, that same incident would come up, and almost in response to where it got started. But nobody ever believed him, right? So how could this be done in an hour where it took 25 years? What's the difference here? Trust, trusting the person, the practitioner learning to trust the client.